Have you ever noticed someone checking out your child? 1. Not my daughter, rather my sister, and this was recent. I was going out at Wendy's to eat with my 10-year-old sister after a nice bike ride and some tag in the park. After I order, I noticed someone was standing a little too close to my sister, who was visibly uncomfortable. I motioned at her with a come hither gesture. She walked over to me, and the same man decided to follow her. As he was standing next to me, I noticed him look at my sister's ass, and whistle, and then make a shocked face. Now me being the super outgoing person I am, I look this man in the eye, and yell, "Are you checking out my 10-year-old sister?" I managed to turn some heads, one of which was the store manager, who was rather well built, at least 200 pounds. He walked over, and yelled at the man to get the hell out of my store, you sick fuck. Moral of the story: take care of your sister. 2. I sure did. My daughter has always been beautiful, even as a child. She had golden hair and was the prettiest little girl. One day we went to IHOP, and when we walked in, out of the corner of my eye I noticed this guy with glasses noticing my 5-year-old. I can't describe it, but I was immediately on alert. I put it behind me and we ordered lunch. About halfway through, my daughter said she needed to use the restroom. I said, "Do you want me to come?" But she said no, and off she went. The restroom was down a short hall and near the entrance. As she disappeared, I saw the guy from before walk towards the restrooms. Immediately I got up and walked there. I was going to walk into the men's, and if I didn't see him, go right into the women's. As I turned the corner, there was the guy on a payphone, but he was standing very still with the receiver to his ear and not speaking. I knocked on the restroom door. "Hey, Wednesday, you okay?" "Yes." "Well, I'm just gonna wait here for you." And then I stared at this guy for almost a full minute. Finally, he hangs up the phone and walked away, but no coin dropping sound was heard, which if you remember was very specific, as it held the coin until the phone was hung up in order to either return the coin or drop it in the collection bin, and no sound meant there was no coin in that payphone. My daughter came out and we went back to finish our lunch, and the guy just walked straight out the door to his car, which was parked right beside the entrance. 3. It started for my oldest daughter when she was about 12 years old. She noticed it, too. Her middle school was right next to a major street in Chicago, and she and the other girls noticed that some men would stare at them while they, the girls, were at recess outside, and the men were stopped at the stoplight on the corner by the school's recess field. She and her friends noticed that most of the time, it was a certain stereotype of man that did the staring. As they described it, it was usually dirty guys in work trucks. 4. I am the child. When I was 14, I was walking with my mother, Nana, and little brother at a strip mall. We walked past a cafe, where one older man could not keep his eyes off of me and eventually began to point. At 14 I was told by numerous people that I looked older, but that was no excuse for his behavior. My mother loudly said, "All these old men looking at my child not knowing she's 14. He quickly turned around and stopped pointing. I hate that I have to say this, but WTF does what I was wearing have to do with anything? It's like you're trying to justify an old pervert's actions. I was wearing jean shorts and an oversized tee. Maybe educate yourself and stop victimizing. You're only making yourself sound like an old pervert yourself." 5. Yes, like me, my daughter developed early. Like me, she is very curvy, but thin. We aren't model tiny, but we do have nice bodies that men generally seem attracted to, especially if they're into large breasts. The first time I noticed it happening, we were walking on Orleans Avenue in New Orleans, heading to Carrollton to get some sushi or go to the grocery store or something like that. Right as we get to the corner, I notice some guy, late 30s probably, in a convertible, staring at my daughter. She was probably about 13 years old at the time. 14 years old max, since we moved to another neighborhood when she was older than that. Yes, she had a womanly body, but if you bothered to look at her face, and it seems like men never do, you could tell she wasn't an adult yet. Certainly not old enough for him to be drooling over. It started that day and it has yet to stop. Though she's an adult now, I realized that day that I would need to talk to her about it, that she needed to know what would happen and how to deal with it if it got uncomfortable for her or if they didn't stop at just staring. 6. Yes, it was a 60-something-year-old male neighbor, and he was checking out my son, who was 8 at the time. He had already mentioned that my son was very handsome, which I thought was a really weird thing to say. On the day it happened, I was on my front porch reading and you couldn't see me from the road. My kids were riding their scooters back and forth in front of the house. The neighbor slowed down and stared at my son, his car at almost a complete stop. For a second I thought he was being safe because the kids were in the road, but I quickly realized what he was really doing. I stood up, and as soon as he saw me he took off. He only lived 2 houses down. I was crazy with anger. I sent the kids in the house and went around back to find my boyfriend. He said he would handle it. He ended up asking another neighbor about the man. Then he asked that neighbor to make sure to explain to the man that he, my BF, had done time in prison. A few weeks later my BF ran into the creepy neighbor at a bar. He brought up the message my BF had sent and tried to laugh it off. My BF made it abundantly clear that he was not messing around. He told him I was angry and had already talked to my brother, who was on the local police force, about it. He then told the neighbor not to use our street anymore, but to come and go from the adjoining street by his house. We never had another problem. I warned my kids about him and referred to him as the creepy neighbor. I never saw him drive by our house again, but I kept a sharp eye on him until he moved away.